general increase. You'd also sent around another memo, and so I just wanted to check where you think that, where you'd like to see that fall. Should we?
So two things. I also wanted to share the view that it's one of the goals for the BOS for this year is really to encourage collaboration between boards and committees, and this is certainly a big step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned as well for the two of our committees to get together and really sort of have the opportunity to discuss what I would hope to be significant issues for the town. The other one of the other goals, or I don't know if it was actually a stated goal, but one of the other driving forces behind a lot of what we talked about as a Board of Selectmen putting together the goals was sort of underlying question, Dover 2020, does it work? And we wanted to, as we went through the various and sundry issues, we wanted just to make sure that, that was at the back of our minds. We wanted to make sure that as the town government organization itself is actually as effective and efficient as it should be. So that's always sort of a background concern as we move forward. And so one of the things that sort of happened, and this is for me now, was this whole discussion of general salary increases sort of triggered me to go back and look at my files. And it turns out that the issue of financial sustainability, and in particular, some of the policy that we have been following sort of lockstep for years, have a long-term financial impact that I'm not sure everyone is aware of. And so I took this opportunity, knowing that we would get together, to put together really a discussion note. It was Bob's ideas that he sort of stumbled upon over the past several years that he thought were important to bring to everyone's attention, because one of the things that I am seriously concerned about is the financial sustainability of the town. And when I looked at some leading indicators, and again, this is me, so that, this is my unverified sort of take it thing. I realized that our cost growth, our operating budget over from years 2003 to 2020 grew from 19 to close to $39 million. And then I did a calculation on consumer price indexing, and out of that increase of 19 to 39, about $7 million is accounted for by inflation. That leaves a gap of $13 million, which is a big number. And looking back, and I don't have answers, but having a cost curve that grows at double inflation is good is really never good. It's only good if your revenues are growing at twice inflation. So when that came up, I was looking at policies that may impact that kind of growth over time. And the one that I keep coming back to is the fact that we have been fairly generous with salary increases, and salary increases compound through time. People seem to want to focus on large, sort of capital spending, which is invariably a one-time item, and ignore the compounding effect of salary increases over time. And so I thought I would re-raise that issue. Personally, it was my last campaign platform issue that hasn't been addressed. So I thought this might be a good time to do it. If it's salary-driven cost, then we have to look at the components of salary-driven cost. And invariably, the way we do things is we've been giving people a combination of step increases, and cost of living adjustments. And in an era when the cost of living has been pretty flat and actually under the Federal Reserve's sort of guidance, that's a policy that makes little sense to me. I have some things in there about, in the note that I sent, that the nominal wage increase is 3.5 to 4%. That includes, that number includes an inflation adjustment. In the schools, for the first part of the aughts, teachers were getting 4% plus 3%. They were getting 7% compounding raises through time. That became an issue, obviously, and we changed the way we began to negotiate teacher contracts right after the Great Recession of 2008. We took, and this involved Mrs. Hunter, who was instrumental in this. We went from a school committee only sort of negotiating posture to one that included a member of the boards of selectmen from both towns. And we decided to, as a negotiating strategy, include not just wage negotiation, but also benefits and other issues. So we looked at a total way of negotiating with total compensation. That was pretty effective. We had targeted rates that were targeted increase levels that were targeted to the underlying growth rate of 2.5%. We negotiated away for a couple of 2 or 3 past negotiations. The last negotiation that was done more recently, the interest-based bargaining process that we had used in the past, where both parties came to the table and tried to mutually agree, was changed to interest-based. I mean, it was changed to basically traditional bargaining. And the schools, the school unions actually hired union representation to handle their side of the negotiation. And I just felt that we was sort of put in a box, and that's something that I think going forward needs to be addressed. When I was thinking about the cost growth, I was trying to understand why, with the cost growth factor so high, I'm assuming that the overall tax rate has been moderated, and I don't know why. And I couldn't get the numbers on the growth in the tax rate over the same period of time, so I'm a little lost there. But essentially, I think that we have not suffered as much as our friends in Sherburne in terms of the tax, because I think we've had higher gross valuations over time, which drove revenue. And I think we also had more new construction at a higher price point, which also drove revenue. So I think the impact of all these cost increases, at least in Dover, has been muted by what's happened on the revenue side. And again, I don't know if this is repeatable. So in any event, I have issues about compensation and why and how and all that kind of stuff. I have articles and discussion points about inflation and how it should or shouldn't be used and what we've done and where it came from. But essentially, my concern is, as we go forward, if we keep doing the thing, if we keep operating the way we're operating, it seems to me that taxes are going to continue to rise, and there's really only 2 ways out. What happens when taxes rise is people get displaced, people on fixed income or more modest means, they get replaced by people of wealth. Or if I'm right about we've been mitigating our tax increase in Dover because of rising growth and rising market values. If we continue to go, then we're going to have to increase. We're going to have to essentially grow bigger, which may impact sort of community culture and put additional strain on resources. So I thought this was an important issue. I would like to hear what people think. I would like to find a way to sort of actually confirm this, because the other side, and then I'm done, is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, 3 people tried to start to address this issue. It was Robin Hunter, it was James Stewart, and it was Bob Spring. And we tried to create and build a financial model that we could use to forecast impact over time. Unfortunately, life intervened with the efforts of those three people, and that work just didn't get done at the time. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. We can get into a general discussion if I'll give it back to Gordon. Gordon, you're muted. You can't talk when you're muted. We can't hear you when you're muted.
I'm not using
Gordon, you're showing up twice, one with video and one with just your name. Are you using two different devices?
Yeah, that's sorry. I'm not sure if you were here earlier. I have some technical issues with my primary PC. Every time I get on Zoom, it's really difficult because I'm looking at everyone on this computer but talking. Anyways, long story short, I can't use video without my machine crashing, which is a problem when you're the, I guess, administrator. So anyways, thank you, Bob, and thank you for the memo in advance summarizing that. It was very helpful. I think before we jump into discussing the general increase, I'd like to offer up the opportunity for anyone to ask questions, Bob, with regard to his memo and the presentation he's just given. So I'd sort of turn the floor over to see if anyone wants to throw some questions at Bob.
I have a question for the group. I think I said in my note, let me know if I'm wrong. I mean,
Bob, did you do any analysis on the per capita rates of growth?
no, it's one of the, Cam, it's one of the things that I think needs to be done.
Right. Because I was surprised at the growth of the population of the town over the last 20 years.
Yeah, so it gets back to having a firm understanding of how these various things interrelate. And to me, it's not so terribly different from the conversations we have at TAD. I'm looking to make sure we really understand the impact of decisions that we take over time.
Yeah.
And the compounding effect of raises is a very, very nefarious thing. I mean, you know, and you know, you really need to be.
But it wouldn't be surprising if operating costs increases with the population growth as well. So I think in any sort of formal analysis we do, we really need to take that into account.
Yeah.
Right. I also think Bob's analysis is extremely one-sided because there are other factors that come into play here. You know, I think one of our focuses has been to try and decrease the increase in the tax rate. There are also market conditions that play into effect. And, you know, although we were successful in 2008 with the union negotiation, subsequent to that, we were unsuccessful with our approach and were forced back into negotiating like the rest of the market. So I completely agree with you. I think Bob has made some valid observations on the one side of the balance sheet, so to speak, but we also need to look at all factors, including, you know, is this sustainable? I don't know. You know, certainly citizens should expect tax rates to go up over time, you know, even if there isn't an inflationary environment, because there are costs that will go up above inflation. So, you know, there are a number of choices we have. One, to look at the services we provide, determine whether those services are excessive or not, and make a determination as to whether or not those need to be addressed. You know, right now we're embarking upon what we're calling a modernization. That modernization, the impact of that is to increase in the short term, heads, so maybe we need to look at that. And again, and say, does all of this continue to make sense? In addition to that, we need to look at the revenue side of the equation. As we look at Carroll Community Center, I hate to beat a dead horse, but are we still thinking about any revenue opportunities there? So I think just like we're trying to balance the increase in the tax rate, and we have a bunch of tools that are available to us, this plays into it as well. And I think you have to keep asking yourself if the decisions you're making are still the right kinds of decisions. But so those are just my thoughts. I think Jim Rapetti wants to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Robin, and thank you, Bob. I just want just to go back to my days, many decades ago, when I was on the planning board in town. At that time, there had been a lot of studies that looked at the correlation between population growth and budget cost for towns, and we were concerned at that time that as the population was continuing to grow, that at some point we were going to, it was a step function where your costs would be fairly proportional to your population growth, but then when you hit a certain level because of additional you would have to start to provide because of the density increase in population, the costs would rise significantly. And I think it would be helpful if we were able to determine whether we're getting close to that level, and maybe that's been a contributing factor. Gino Carlucci's wife at that time, Pandora Carlucci, was the town planner, and I know that she was very knowledgeable about those phenomena. So it might be that at some point, as you're exploring this further, Bob and the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee, if they so desire, to consult with them. The other point I wanted to make is consistent with the question that Cam raised. I think people would also want to look at the budget costs for personnel versus productivity. As you have an increase in population, services that are provided, even if they're proportional, even if it's just a 45-degree angle on the chart, that's going to be a factor in terms of how much you're compensating employees. So it would be interesting to see how that fit into the calculus as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Robin. I'm gonna go to John because he's my other member. I need to let him say something wise.
Well, thank you, sir. Jim and Robin. Thanks, Bob. So, Bob, I also just wanted to remind you, as Robin had reminded you before, on page 2 of your platform, one of the things that you really have been mindful of and brought to our attention at the very beginning was, are we understaffed? And the quest for the right size relative to the population, relative to the services, relative to what you were hearing in our townhouse and in our townhouse function. Getting the right people, getting the right number of people. So it's a balance that we really have to be mindful of. We have replaced 6 people of the 13 people in the townhouse, and we're in a very good place relative to where we were with the number of people. So I think that is, we've been very mindful of that. I would also remind everyone that in our last 3 union negotiations outside of the schools, so police, our town employees, highway department, and our chief, and then our non-union employees, in these negotiations, a lot of our costs are driven by union mandates. So you have hourly rates, you have hourly equivalent rates, you have a number of items that are inside the union part of the contracts that we as the town have to adhere to. I'd also like to remind everyone that our personnel board and these, our two boards, have really worked very hard for the non-union employees to get them above the 50% pay rate for the like towns. So while all of these things have to be taken into consideration separately, I think in Bob's memo, it gives us an opportunity to pull the lens back and to see how we are going to do this relative to our revenue increases and our proposed revenue increases going forward. So
This is Mary Kerrigan. I just wanted to make a comment that I think all of these issues that we're raising are really important. And while we've talked a lot about compensation as the personnel board, we do see the big picture. And one of the things that I think has really hampered us is because of the transitions and other things, we don't have data. And now we're doing this study, and I think it will help us all when that study is done to know where we stand. Because we don't know at this point where we are at. It's been, it's been a long period of time now. And so without some fresh data, we can only make the best call we can make. But we're very clear that we don't have data to be able to work with you to help with this process.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, John. I'd just like to understand what the driver is behind that $13 million growth. And I'd like to find a way to actually, I don't know, Jim, you were talking about the role that you had in the past. I mean, it just seems to me, because of the way that we are organized, we're a distributed system with independent boards and, boards and committees. There's no sort of oversight of all that goes on unless it sits within the BOS. But even if it sits within the BOS, you have the school, which on the salary side must represent, 2/3 of the employees, and that sits outside. So it's not clear to me that we have sort of a cost management committee or an oversight committee to make sure that we fully understand the impacts of the decisions that we make today through time. Anyway, so that's, but again, that's the point of using it tonight.
Right, Bob, and just as a reminder, there are also some unfunded mandates by the state that we're funding. So I would throw out there that most likely a significant part of that 13 million is attributable to education mandates that we are obligated to fund.
It'd be good to know.
Right, because I would say when you take a look at the school budget specifically, certain components of it, the town's funding has increased dramatically, and I think that also goes hand in hand to what Cam said, where the population is growing as well. So, at one, the size, the number of classes, the number of children that are enrolled in the schools, all of that has gone up. So I really do agree with Cam. We should be, we should look at the correlation between those two things. Because I don't think it would be hard to pinpoint, what exactly is driving that increase. There's also, we did 2 large buildings, so there's additional debt service in there that we're servicing. That's part of the operating budget too.
That's been coming down.
Right.
That's why we should form a group who has the time and the expertise to look at it. Because
I mean, that's what we have always said. The long range planning committee. This should really be a focus of theirs to pull together, a long range financial model, utilizing a bunch of the tools that that Chris and the finance team have put in place. You know, when I was winging the revenue side of the budget, I would have killed to have some of the tools that Chris and Kathy have put together now, because I was really just winging it. You know, it's amazing.
I know, Robin, I know.
I came close, but, you know, just dumb luck, I think. But, you know, I think it would make a lot of sense. And then, you know, have that committee try and factor in the growth as well. Because, you know, this is all part of modernizing. And just because you made decisions today doesn't mean that those decisions are the right decisions for 5 years from now. So you should continue to ask yourself, am I still doing things the right way? Are these still the right things for us to do as a town? Are there other ways we can, you know, continue to reduce the increase in the tax rate?
Well,
just to be a contrarian, I'm wondering whether, from another perspective, one might consider increasing the retail base in the town if we're concerned about the sustainability.
Exactly.
Now, this is not an argument for doing that. It's just that I think we should start considering a whole pile of different variables to work out really how we can manage this going forward.
Cam and I didn't have a conversation beforehand, but, you know, as I've always said, there are a lot of unpopular ideas out there, or ideas that trigger emotions. It doesn't mean you shouldn't look at them.
Right.
You know,
and also, we can also ask ourselves how much we're prepared to pay for the luxury of having a pristine rural neighborhood. You know, and that's important too.
No, completely agree.
Jim?
Yeah, I was going to say, make sure I'm unmuted here. I was going to say, I like Robin's idea of using the long-range planning committee, because it always seemed to me that would be an ideal use of their time. They're often looking for tasks, and I think that when that committee was first envisioned by our predecessors many decades ago, that was part of the role that they foresaw for that group. And we haven't been able to use it the way that I think, would have liked or should have, in part because, again, of the problem that Robin pointed to, the lack of data, and Mary also pointed to. But now with Chris and Kate on board, we do have the capacity to collect that data, and we have the capacity to analyze it correctly. It seems to me that might be something that the Board of Selectmen would want to consider involving the long-range planning committee with. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Cameron, the only thing I would say is there are a lot of things that we can do if we understand how the
Right.
thing is today.
No, I'm with you there, Bob. I fully agree. We need to do that analysis because it's just unconscionable that we should go forward without really having a good understanding of what sort of costs are going to hit us in the future.
Exactly. And I mean, and that's all we're doing is being strategic and trying to plan for the future.
Yep. So how about we hear from the Warrant Committee member? Rob, you must have something to say. Where are you?
I think Janet had a comment.
Yeah, all right, sorry. Yeah, we'll have Janet. Hi, Janet.
Hi. I like the suggestion that Cam brought up about retail, and the reason I brought that up, I agree with that, is even though I do love Dover, and some of you know I lived in Sherburne for 19 years, so I do love this rural roads and the kind of the sense that you get from the community. But given what's happening with the pandemic, and given what Bob had talked about, how we have certain part of Dover community that may not have the same ability to live in town, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had businesses, retail businesses, that create jobs for residents, as well as provide small business opportunities for the residents? So we're actually supporting our community and also creating tax base and keeping some of the community members who may not be able to afford the houses if we keep raising the tax rates. So I wanted to bring that up. So that was my thought.
Thank you. Rob?
I mean, I don't have an opinion either way on the topic that Janet just brought up, but I do think that the revenue side and the growth side is really important. And I think that when you start looking at the changing demographics of the town, you have some people who are dying to have a restaurant in town and some people who say just go to Heritage. So I think that you have some changing demographics. I mean, when Janet was speaking, my visceral reaction was like, I don't need a commercial base in the center of town. That's not why I moved here. But I know that there are many people who feel differently. I do think that when we start looking at long-range planning and expenditures and development, I do get concerned about our senior population and the needs for them to have space to stay in town. And I think the planning board is starting to address that. And I think I do think that your comment about us all being independent boards and not getting together is really resonating with me, because I think there's some good ideas that the planning board's having, and they're having conversations on their own, and the warrant committee is having conversations on their own, and the board of selectmen are having conversations on their own. And if the liaisons aren't there at every meeting doing their job at communicating really well, it makes for a very inefficient. You have to retell your story every time. And so I think there's some really innovative things coming out of the planning board that could really shape some of the issues that we're addressing. And this long-range planning committee, I sat on it last year, the one meeting that it had. I think it does need something to do, and maybe some new members to revitalize it. My other point that I want to make is the issue. It was your last sentence on your document about a consultant, and I think that before we go out and try to hire someone to fix our problems, I think there's a lot of really smart people on this call that could figure some of this stuff out without having to expend a lot of cash. Even just this last couple weeks, I was just calling the different finance boards in different towns and their chairs, and I've started to talk with a bunch of them about what they're doing with their personnel increases. So it's easy benchmarking with towns like Stowe and Carlisle and Lincoln and Weston, and it's just picking up the phone and talking to someone for 20 or 30 minutes. They're dying to know what we're doing just as much as we're dying to know what they're doing. So, and I will say that none of them thought 3% sounded really smart. They all were like, that's crazy. So it just as an FYI. But I just think, I think that there are things that we can do to get some of this information that don't require consultants.
Rob, I just want to jump in here and ask a quick follow-up. So if you don't mind, would you give, you don't have to go to depth, and I'm not going to give you a hard time if you don't recall something specifically, but could you just sort of summarize what you've been hearing from the various towns?
Yeah, so I would say that the first thing is that we are in far better shape organizationally, like in terms of having had our town meeting and just being on top of things. Most of the like towns of ours had town meetings like weeks ago to deal with their budget for this year. So, I think we really have done a good job in organizing ourselves to make sure that our budget is gone through. So kudos to everyone for that. In terms of personnel increases for non-union folks, there's a lot of nervousness about increasing in other towns. And so I had a good conversation with the chair in Weston, and in back and forth with Carlisle right now. But I think that most of them were feeling really nervous about putting any kind of big increase, and just because of what's unknown, and that the costs that are coming down the pike for dealing with COVID with the schools and the extra outlay of costs. They don't know yet what that's going to be. It sounds like they're spending a lot more money on things than maybe we are, or our schools are not sharing what they're are moving their budget around to make it work better than their schools. I'm not quite sure, but I think in Weston they don't go over 2% the last few years for just to keep things their tax rate is way higher than ours, so they're trying to really bring that down. So that's where other towns are. I'm still in the process of trying to connect with some of them.
Rob, so I mean, I've heard, you know, you and I have been talking about this, but one of the things, and we discussed it with regard to one town, do any of the other towns you've spoken with, are they focused on this sort of 50% goal? Is that, how are they orienting and sort of guiding their decision-making process there?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's unclear. I think they're interested in equity, but they don't really have the same kind of goal. Like, none of them really have a goal about that. I mean, I also think that the finance committees in those towns have a little less sway than it seems like historically the Warrant Committee has in terms of advising the town, and that the Personnel Board has a little more push. So I think it's just organized a little differently. But I think that their feeling is that they, the few that I've spoken to, is that they're really trying to tighten their belt because they're just really nervous about the future financial situations in their towns, about being able to pay for things and keeping their buildings up. And, you know, they're also trying to address things like Weston just put a bunch of power lines underground in the center of town because of climate change issues. And so they're trying to address other things. Sherborne obviously has their library. So, I mean, each town has their own unique things. I mean, I think we're so small and have so few things to like keep up that we're in good shape in a lot of ways. I mean, I think our conservative nature has made us, at least to me, feel like we're in a different spot than the other towns that I spoke to, which is great. But it still doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having these conversations.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Peter? Steve?
Andy?
Andy? Did we cover everybody, Gordon?
Yeah, I think, Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Nothing additional. Thanks.
All right.
Hey, Gordon, one more thing. I just wanted to put this out there to the group, and I think it's I think that one of the things that I've just been mulling over and I've been trying to wrap my brain around is why we have to make kind of a firm decision now, and why can't we revisit like kind of the number we want to plug in if we kind of come up with a recommendation for now to kind of start with, and then revisit it as we go through the budget process and go lower or higher depending on, I know that's not historically what we've done, but I don't believe there's any like rule that says we have to be firm on something, that we can't look back over the course of the the budget process and say like, okay, if we really want to give our folks this much, we have to like cut back on these operational things in the budget, or whatever it is. And I don't know. I feel like that was the other thing I kind of was thinking about when I was speaking to these other committees, is that they're given some of them basically say like, okay, even if you say 3% or 2% or whatever, we're still giving you the pot, and the different departments have to kind of manage they have to decrease other things if they want to have the 3% or the 2.5% or the 2% or whatever it is. And doesn't feel like that's how we kind of budget, but I just wonder if we don't have to make a firm decision, but kind of more guidance, and then revisit before open hearing or before when the budgets are starting to be more firm. But that's just my 10 cents. I don't know if anyone else disagrees or agrees with that.
I think, Robin, that's certainly something that is something that's done when we're negotiating with the teachers union. Robin, you want to just quickly cover that one?
Well, I've always said that I've always been a little frustrated about the budget process because it seems as though decisions are made in a vacuum, and it's really hard to make those kinds of decisions until you see what the total budget looks like. And Chris and I have talked about this, and I think Chris has worked with these finance teams. So my suggestion would be to have budget makers increase, give them a 2% for the salary line item, use it as a placeholder, see how everything rolls up, and then start making decisions. You'll have another column on the side about different programs that you either don't need to implement this year, or so you can switch things once you figure out where your total budget came in at and you're satisfied that that's a kind of increase that you can afford for the year. So my suggestion would be to, I don't think, and Chris, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anybody's waiting and the budget process is on hold, waiting for guidance on this line item. So I think we could easily say, for now as a placeholder, increase it by 2%. And once we figure out what the total budget looks like, we'll come back to you.
Robin, wouldn't that create sort of some questions in terms of, one is, I think I worry that folks would sort of plan things and have certain expectations, and when those were not realized, they would not be complete. I also worry. Oh, sorry. I also worry about if we're voting to approve budgets. It's tough to do that. We don't want them changed, I guess, in the process of.
Well, Gordon, there has to be a vetting process, right? So so you either buy in that you're going to vet a full budget, a whole budget, so that you understand what the ramifications are of decisions that you're making in its entirety, or you can continue to vet it piecemeal. For me, I've always felt really uncomfortable making any kinds of decisions until I understand, what the full expense side of the budget looks like and what the full revenue side looks like. I am by no means suggesting that the vetting process is cut short. What I am suggesting is let the staff pull together an entire budget so you as a warrant committee can understand, their initial pass at what revenue and expenses are going to be. And I think it might be helpful as you vet the various items. And that's all I'm suggesting. I'm not saying that the 2% is set in cement. It's just a way to pull the entire budget together.
You're saying we will potentially be going back to departments and sort of pushing back on them and lowering it for specific departments. Am I understanding that right?
The Warrant Committee has a vetting process.
Mm-hmm.
So you ask all departments to come in. If you think Department A, has expenses that are too high, you have every right to go back to that department and say, I think, we would like you to look at X line item.
Is there a risk that
Does it really work that way on the salary line item, though? Because at the last Warrant Committee meeting, we discussed this as far as the general increase that we're talking about here and understood that it had to be applied across the board.
Well, I'm just suggesting that you use 2% and apply it across the board.
But we can't go to one. Then you're saying go to one department and tell that department their expenses are too high. And I'm
Right.
saying you can do that with every other line item but salaries, because in salaries, they've gotten the 2%. So it's either 2% for everybody, or 1 or 3 or 0.
Yep, no, I hear what you're saying.
I mean, I think there's also a risk that that creates an incongruity between different departments, which could potentially.
Right, but you guys are just honing in on expenses. You know, you could, but there are other expenses that you can make decisions on. So, you know, I don't know, personally, I don't know how you can push back really hard or with any confidence without knowing what the total picture looks like. And for this item, we are talking about $72,000 in total.
Yeah, that's how we got the 13 million though, Robin.
I was going to say, this is one of those, you know, there's two kinds of budget items.
In assumptions that, you know, you are looking at one piece of the equation. And I really caution everybody, yes, the budget has grown, but we need to look at every line item and every aspect as to what has contributed to that growth. You know, maybe it is, but what I'm saying, this is a $72,000 amount on a $40 million budget. So, you know,
I think.
Can I just let Andy finish it?
Yes.
I think he was in the
Sure, yeah. So I just wanted to comment on that. I mean, what I was going to say, there's two kinds of budget items, right? There's budget items that are so big and important that they can't be cut, and ones that are so small and insignificant they can't be cut, right? This is one of the latter, it seems like. But, you know, I mean, we need to look at all of these, and I agree with Robin. We need data. At the Warrant Committee meeting, we weren't presented with the data that allows me personally to recommend anything north of 0 on this line.
I think, this is Mary Kerrigan, I think it's a very interesting idea. And I really do think, Robin, it's interesting. And we are in a difficult year. You're trying to look at a big strategic picture. And there's some holes in terms of what we have for data. So putting in a number and then looking at the whole budget after it comes back together, I think makes a lot of sense given how much complexity we're looking at. The only thing I would make a comment as an HR person is, whatever you decide to do, I really think you should think about doing it for the whole group. To have somebody in one department have a different increase than someone in another department because that the person's department had more flexibility or something could be problematic. But I think that Robin's idea is an interesting one.
no, and I'm not suggesting cutting, you know, I'm just saying pick a number and the
Yes.
number, you know, I think looking at the other increases for the other salaries that are already pre-negotiated, I think 2% is a reasonable increase. But, you know, I'm just going from memory, so.
Yeah, Robin, I think the average for all of the union contracts, it looks like the average would be a 2.25 increase across the union contracts. And so, I mean, I struggle because on one hand, I agree with Andy that because we've asked for data and we have no data, it's really hard. But on the other hand, I do feel like there's kind of like feels like an ethical obligation to do something to help our staff, given that there are colleagues that happen to have a union are getting something. So I do feel like there's an obligation to do something. The 3% seems really high to me and it seems challenging to me. So I'm curious what the rest of the Warrant Committee is thinking. There's some folks that haven't weighed in, and I'm just curious what other folks are thinking because I don't have an answer for what where I think it should land, which is why I think I agree with Robin that it would be nice if we could have a placeholder and look at the whole budget and say like, okay, if we, you know, even though it's only $72,000, if at the end, you know, we don't have a hole to fill with free cash, like we could then look back and say like, okay, you know, maybe 1.5%, maybe 2.5% works out fine with our budget without having to raise the the tax rate or raise having to come up with revenue or something like that. I don't know. That's just my gut. But again, like, I know that that's not how we've done it in the past. So if we're going to stay with how we typically do it, it's really hard when you have I agree with Andy's point. I think it's really hard to have when you have no data to make a decision. So I would lean back on what's the average of what we've been doing with the union folks, and two sounds reasonable to me.
Right, I think that's a.
So may I have a word or two?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. This is yours on the personnel board. I'd like to offer just 2 or 3 thoughts to what we've heard so far. And one is the aspect of scale. That $72,000 in the 40 million budget is less than 0.2% of the entire budget. And when folks are nervous and say 3% is making them anxious, as you've already pointed out, it depends on whatever else is going on in a particular community. In our community, I think it's important, and I think the personnel board has taken this view over the long haul, is that we want to invest in our human capital. And when we do that, and we look at the value that this brings to the individuals compared to the minimal impact it has on the budget, one would want to ask the question, well, why would you not want to do it? That 3% sounds artificially scary when compared to the actual impact on the budget, which is less than 0.2%. And that's what I wanted to suggest.
Thank you. So I would point out that 3% on 2.75 is a 5.75% increase on an annual basis, whatever number you put in. The other thing I've also think what we should be considering, there's 2 pieces of the equity puzzle here. The first piece is the taxpayer. And we need to be equitable to the taxpayer and make sure that we're deriving value from their money that we spend. And we want to be equitable to the employees and make sure that we're being fair to the employees as well. In my note, I pointed out that the labor market over the last 15 years has changed dramatically. And that one of the things that we need to do is we look at the data and try to do comparison analysis, that we understand that a stable, secure, reasonably payable, reasonably compensated job with good benefits is an anomaly in the world today. And I think that what's happened and needs to be considered is that in the private sector, people are highly compensated with no job security, and benefits have been eviscerated, which means that the value of public employees have risen overall because of the different mix of the components. There is a lot of change that's happened since 2000, but we still seem to be going through the same sort of lockstep sort of practice, and it really doesn't take into account the relative values of a public job where like I said, because of the stability, because of the pay, because of the benefits, because of the defined benefit retirement plan, it raises the value of that package one hell of a lot more than it was 10, 15 years ago. It is a complex question. I raised this question not because I was worried about $70,000 going to non-union employees, but it's the practice that we've been following for close to 20 years of adding COLAs to reasonable raises, and that result has been double the inflation rate growth. Now, I'm making a bet that most of the growth, and I could be wrong, that's why I agree with everybody that we really need to get at the data. I'm making a bet that the biggest cost driver in our budgets is salaries, and it's the compounding effect of those increases in time. And a real hard nut to crack. And what's happened, and sort of the history of this is that in the private sector, people were automated out of jobs, and jobs were outsourced because unions in the private sector because businesses couldn't be competitive. We don't have that in the public sector. And we don't want that in the public sector. But we do need to make sure we understand cost growth, and we do need to make sure that we understand the impact of cost growth on the town. And I think, whether it's the long-range planning committee or some other group, sitting down and thoughtfully putting together a mission for a group of people to really take a hard look at all of the complexity of the issues that people have discussed here tonight would be a very important first step, again, in my view.
Bob, can I add one thing to this?
Sure, John.
So I would also remind, as Robin has pointed out many times, that there's other sides to this, to the complexity of this issue, specifically as it relates to personnel contracts that we have negotiated, union and non-union. One of the things that I can tell you that we, the three of us, have taken this into consideration at a deep, deep, deep level is how do we, the town of Dover, compare with for our employees with regards to their satisfaction? How satisfied are they? How happy are they? What do they think of their work environment? Specifically, I'll give you one very specific example. When I was negotiating on behalf of the board of selectmen, the equipment operators for the town of Dover, specifically the highway folks, I called every operator that required the same license that we require our operators to have in towns that every one of our employees worked in. So, for example, from Acushnet to Middleborough to Natick to Boston, I called union employers, Smith and R.W. Smith and Acushnet, Zion and Middleborough, Robert Auer and Natick, Robert Quigley and Natick, Boston Sand and Gravel. And I asked all of the same questions. We were 1% in the cost of living between what the union, what the non-union folks wanted and what we were, where we were. They wanted 3%. We were at about just a little over 2%. After laying out all of the data from these companies in the negotiating process, we realized they would rather have what we were offering than go to the private employer. So what Bob is saying and what Robin has been saying are absolutely true. There are other factors involved that we have here that you cannot get, and they would rather have in many of our employment agreements that we offer. So please don't lose sight of that.
Thank you, John. So I'm not sure exactly where we are.
Right. So clearly this is a much bigger problem than we're going to solve today.
Oh, yeah.
The question is, for the current budget season, how are we going to move forward? We all agree we don't have market data. So until we get market data, but to Rob's point, is it fair to give these people a 0 increase when we're giving everybody else on average 2%? So what is fair and equitable until we have the data that, we need to move forward?
So, Robin, I guess part of what has, sort of occurred to me as we've been discussing this, both in the context of, Rob's suggestions about, sort of we can adjust it later, as well as, sort of discussions that, I've had with a number of folks, particularly on the Warrant Committee and some with Rob, some other folks some of whom are on the call. I don't like the idea of adjusting it later, but what I've talked to a few people about, and without giving an opinion today, they've been open to the idea of potentially doing something along the lines of, essentially letting departments know that we're having a lower increase than we've had in the past, but we're open to their sort of proposing special increases for certain, town employees who are either undercompensated or are sort of overworked relative to what they should be. And so I think there's a couple alternatives here for us. I mean, there's a 0%, and we ask everyone to, if you think that the increase should be moved in step, you bring it to us and make a proposal, give a justification, and I've also, had a number of conversations about that. Another potential alternative is we have a sort of a lower step increase, and we consider adjusting it at a later date, which personally I think there are sort of risks to that, and I sort of echo Mary's concern about the perception of both, sort of having different adjustments for general increases, for different departments. I think, my biggest sort of concern here, though, and I've talked to a lot of people, and it's come up a lot in this call, is it seems like there's not any data here. As the Warrant Committee, our sort of mandate is to try and vet what's being presented to us and give the town a reasonable opinion based on the facts and circumstances and the pros and cons. And, I think, as a number of people have mentioned, there's a level of discomfort with doing that given a lack of data this year. So I think, without wanting to, propose this per se, I think a lower increase than what we've historically done, and considering other options down the road is probably our best, our best approach. And I'd sort of like to get other people's feedback on whether that seems reasonable. Given again, the biggest thing is just the lack of data.
Gordon Carrigan.
Hey, Mary.
I absolutely agree with you. I understand. I think we're probably in the personnel board feeling the same way. We don't have the data. I think that you should make a call based on what seems to be right to the town with the information that we have, which is thin. And then I think we need to be able to provide data in a reasonable time frame for next year. And I would just advise you to go slowly into doing anything that affects people or changes individual people until we have a program in place. So I shouldn't get a raise and you not get a raise, or I should get more than you get more. Until we know, till we have the data, I would say we pick the right financial number and get the data going forward.
Right, and Mary, to your point, just remember the position of the Warrant Committee. It's not to dictate policy. You're supposed to vet. So, what you're suggesting is a change in policy. So to Mary's point, what you really need to think about is, what is the Warrant Committee's recommendation for an increase? Is it 0%? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 3%? Is it somewhere in between that? And then, at the end of the day, if the budget comes back as a total budget of something that isn't sustainable or not palatable for the town, then we need to look at each line item. And if we decide that this line item needs to be reduced by 2%, it's the total line item. So it's across the board.
If I could just add, the difference of 1%, the difference between 2% and 3%, is $23,000. When we get to the end of the budget process, nobody is going to clutch their pearls over $23,000 one way or the other. It is not going to factor into a decision as to we have to make major changes to the budget, because this is a tiny change to the budget. I think we should pick a number now and stick to it.
Well said, Peter.
So, I had raised something at the last meeting and people didn't seem overly receptive, so I'll probably get the same reaction here. But if we put in a 2% placeholder, I don't understand, because it seems like the concern that everybody has is we don't have any data. So 2% is basically just a number we're sort of grabbing at in the dark. And so why couldn't we do the survey now with our placeholder in there? Even if it takes 4 or 5 months, that's coming back in January, February timeframe. And if it comes in and it says we're at the 70th percentile, then maybe that 2% should go down to 1%. And if it turns out we're at the 40th percentile, maybe that 2% goes to 3%. And the effect on the budget, as Peter just pointed out, is 10 grand. Like, I don't know, I guess I'm still struggling to understand, given that we're talking 20,000 here, why there's a rush to pick it now versus just the placeholder option that was thrown out earlier, and then getting the data.
So your suggestion makes a lot of sense. The only issue we have is we're not going to have the data back in that short of a time, because we actually asked the same question. It takes a lot longer to do one of these studies than I understood. I think Chris had said, Chris, are you awake? Did you say it was 8 months or something like that? It takes a lot longer. It's much more time intensive than I had imagined. So.
I think we can't fix this. So I think we should pick a number that makes sense and then settle it down. Because I don't think you want people guessing and looking around and expecting more, expecting less. Just make a decision that makes sense. We'll have data next year. We'll go on. Would be my perspective.
So from my perspective, throwing the comment that 1, 2, or 3% is only this amount or that amount or this amount. This is the conversation that I've heard in school committee negotiations, right? The incremental change year to year is small, and so we sort of swallow and move on. The growth in that line item compounding through time is not small. And there is no justification, there's no financial justification for giving people a cost of living adjustment where there's no cost of living adjustment. So in the paper that I handed out, the nominal wage for people, including cost of living adjustments, is 3.5% to 4%. We are already paying this particular group of employees 2.75%. 1% would put them right in that nominal range. We should clearly not go over, when you add 2 and 3% to a 4% increase, you're doubling and that's what I'm concerned about. That's what I think is driving the cost curve, and what I think we need to spend a heck of a lot more time understanding. It's not this, it's the bigger issue, not this particular issue, but when we add COLAs to all of the base step increases, I think you get this compounding effect that really comes out to a large number. So,
I agree with you, but
whoa.
Just to be a broken record, what you're saying is true, but that's the market.
No, it's not the market.
Yes, Bob, it is the municipal market. Go to every other community. Bob, we were successful with the union negotiations for the teachers. We thought other towns would come along. We got put right back into a box because that was market, and that's what we had to do. So again, we're not, this is a much, much, much bigger issue that we're not going to solve this evening. So the question is, right now in front of us, we have union agreed to increases that are on top of steps that average around 2%. So, that is data that we have already. That's already in the budget. The decision before us now is What do we want to do with this non-union group? And, you know, so what is the recommendation? You know, I think the personnel board tried to put together, you know, they used the same process that they've used. We all agree, maybe that's not the right thing this year. We haven't seen the data. So, you know, the question again, I'm just going to pose it. Is it 0%? You know, what is the recommendation that we're going to vote on? You know, in my mind, it should be around 2% because that's what we're giving to everybody else. So how can we single out the small group?
Just also for clarification, looking at the data that Chris pulled together, 20 out of the 41 folks are already at their max step. So if we gave 0%, half the employees would get nothing this year, just as a FYI. Is that correct?
What happens when you're at your max step?
No, I understand. I'm not saying that should be yes or no. I'm just saying, so for the warrant committee to understand that if you say 0%, it means half the non-union employees will be getting no increase, which maybe is what the warrant committee wants to do. I want it to be very clear because not everyone in the warrant committee has the spreadsheets that I've gotten to look at. So it's important that people make informed decisions because this is about our human resources. So it's human lives and human salaries and equity. And I think that it's just important to have data. I'm not saying that you could still say 0% and that's what you want to say and that's fine. But I think you should do it knowing what that means. That's all.
This is Mary Carrigan. I just need to make one other comment because a lot of you may not have been through this process. The step process is the whole framework of the comp system, and it's used consistently in most of the towns. If you want to not do that, we can have that conversation, but you're going to take the whole structure out if you don't give the money. Or
No, I don't think anybody's talking about the steps. I think I'm personally talking about the COLAs.
Yeah, we're exclusively talking about the COLAs here, Mary. I don't think we're talking about anything to do with the STEP program.
Could I just quickly make a recommendation for folks to consider, and that is a 2% cost of living adjustment for non-union staff for FY22. The conversation has entirely been centered around data. Your union folks, presumably as you negotiate the contracts, you have the data for comparable communities and comparable market rate, so you know that, right? We don't have the data, and we know that it's going to take at minimum 8 months to get that back for the non-union assessment. Our budget projections, which have been shared to both of these groups, indicate that a 3% salary increase and a 3% expense increase still leaves the town with excess levy capacity for next year. So we know at this point it's affordable. So presuming that the 2% went forward, we go and we do the study, right? And that'll identify a portion of positions that, let's just say, are overcompensated and a portion of positions that are undercompensated. And then we have the data so that we can know when we speak to these non-union groups that your market position, you are high for your market position. And we're actually going to give COLAs for non-union people so that we can bring them up to market position to make everybody equitable. To me, that makes sense, right? If it's affordable this year, you move forward with it. The data will show who's out of line and who's in line. And then the personnel board and the policymakers can then move forward to make those adjustments so that everyone is at market, right? Which sounds like it's a goal of this group this evening. And we've got the data to make the decisions and we move forward.
Gordon, what do you want to do?
So I think from here, well, actually, Sarah, did you, Sarah Kitty, our newest member, is here. I just wanted, you're the only person we didn't ask if you wanted to make a contribution. Do you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask or suggestions? And feel free to say no. You're on mute, by the way, Sarah.
Thank you, Gordon. No, I have nothing additional, and thank you for the opportunity to reply.
No problem, of course. All right. I think we've said a lot about this. And, you know, I don't know, I'm thinking that we're probably going to want to discuss this a little bit more. Having said that, if anyone feels strongly and would like to make a motion on the Warrant Committee, I would entertain such.
Peter, I would be prepared to second your motion if you want to put that one forward.
I can put it forward for 2%. I think that was Peter's suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I am agnostic on the number. What I'm not agnostic on is let's pick it and make our recommendation.
I think since we don't have the data, we don't really have a basis for making any decision that really is a change of direction to what we've historically done. So I suggest we just go with the 2%, and then we use the data to do the analysis, and then when we've got the data, we can take action if it's needed.
I mean, you know, and I would feel more comfortable with even potentially a lower recommendation, with the understanding that we may, on a sort of specific case basis, be willing to consider giving folks an additional bump if they can demonstrate, you know, through some sort of data that they've actually, that, you know, they're underpaid or they're overworked. I mean, you know, we don't want anyone, we don't want to cause issues, especially, you know, where people aren't getting paid what they should be. But, you know, I mean, there's a level of concern, and despite the relatively small and immaterial nature of this line item, you know, it does have big implications. You know, so again, I'm not sure, Jim, what is the procedure, especially in the joint meeting, on taking a straw poll? What are the rules around that?
Well, you can certainly do that. You can have a straw poll. Let me just can I comment on one other item before you have your straw poll? Let me just point out that there's an important fundamental difference between the private sector and the public sector. We are the customers of the public sector, and we're the shareholders. What we put in is what we get out. That's very different from the private sector, where the customers and the owners are separate. And I think that we need to be very careful when I mentioned before about looking at the productivity of the employees. I can say without a doubt, having lived in Dover for a long time, I have absolutely no complaints about the quality of services that I'm receiving from town employees. And I think that's a very important factor that we have to consider when we're talking about what we're going to be doing to impact their lives with respect to cost of living increases and step increases. And I also agree that we need to have more data that's looking not so much at the private sector, but looking at the public sector to see what other towns are doing, and also looking at our own data to see exactly what additional duties we've imposed upon our employees over the time of COVID, and as we've had major growth in our town for the last decade or two. So I would tread very, very carefully. And I'm saying this in my role as a moderator because as a moderator, I want to make sure that all available information becomes available to the town where they're voting on these very important issues. And it's incumbent on all of us in this Zoom room tonight, to gather all the information that we need to make sure that we can answer questions that our citizens will have about the recommendations that are being made.
I would also like to just comment again. I think Gordon's, you know, suggestion is a policy change, and I think we need to be really careful about that, because right now all we can really vote on here is what increase cost of living increase we want to give. Making recommendations about giving an increase to some and not to others is more of a policy change. So I think we need to be careful about that.
Thank you, Robin. That's and thank you. I'm glad to have both of you here, and that's exactly why I was so excited to have this meeting with all of you.
Right, Gordon, if it matters, my vote would be pick 2%, and we have to get our data for next year. If we're wrong this year, we can correct it next year by either giving 0% or 4%. And beyond that, I don't know what else we can really do. So.
Yeah, Gordon, I have to agree with Steve at this point. I feel, the average for the union folks is above 2%, a little bit above 2%, 2.25%. I feel like being a little more conservative than the 3% feels right to me, given the just kind of the uncertainty that a lot of folks feel in town about their own financial situation and COVID and everything that's going on. 2% feels like, if again, I agree with Chris's rationale. If the folks did due diligence with those union contracts, that 2% is still less than the average that they were getting. So that feels like we're trying to be a little more prudent, and we can readjust with the data. I will say, and I think this is really important, we need the data. So last year, 2 years ago, we said we need the data. Last year we said we need the data, and we still don't have it. And I think that's why this is a drawn out conversation, because I think for some of us who've done this now, this is my third time doing this, it's the same conversation. So it feels that's where I think it's the process that's frustrating, not the, I want to give them a cost of living increase. I think it's just the process that's really frustrating. I would agree with Steve if you want me a straw poll.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Rob. And again,
Gordon, I think Janet is raising her hand nicely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. And I just want to. So I appreciate that, and I definitely agree. Having said that, I think we've been getting 2% for a long time. Other towns are getting 2%. Having said that, that's why I want to take a straw poll. So without going further, I'll reach out to Janet and give her the floor.
Can I ask you just one question? So I agree with all the things that's been said so far. The only thing that bothers me is that we keep calling this cost of living adjustment. So when I first got Bob's memo, I completely agree with him because obviously inflation is not there. So maybe, but then when I hear other people talk about how there's more service needing because of the COVID and all these other things, I agree with that too. So I'm okay with 2% as the placeholder and getting the data, but my question is, what kind of data are we getting? Because the data sounded like it was about the jobs and what the jobs should pay, not cost of living adjustment. So I'm just getting confused about what we are voting on.
Gordon, you're on mute again. Do you want me to take that, or do you want to?
So can I say a word here? May I have
Yes, please, yours.
So what's before the Warrant Committee is a cost of living adjustment. What the classification study refers to is a review of all the positions within the town. And the RFP went out and some proposals have come back. And as Chris has noted, it will take them about 6 to 8 months to go through a very intensive job review process, which will also allow us to determine position by position where those positions are in relation to market. What we know today about where we are with the relation to market is that we're about 5 years out from the last market pricing study that we did. And back then we were 4% below the 50th percentile, which is our target. So when you're 5 plus or minus years out, that suggests that the market in a good environment, economic environment, is moving ahead while we're staying behind on the structure overall. But tonight's vote or straw poll has to do with what to apply to the structure in fiscal 22 as a cost of living adjustment. And the personal board was recommending 3% because we want to aim to get closer to the 50th percentile, whereas the voices that you heard here tonight are more concerned about what it does in an age of uncertainty and what it does to our budget, which from my point of view is a very minor amount that we want to invest in our human capital, especially in a time when people are troubled by a variety of distresses and difficulties during this COVID era. But yes, tonight is only for COLA, not for the entire structure.
Thanks, Iris. Janet, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
And I think, Cam, you had asked to be recognized next.
I was going with for the 2%.
Okay, great. Thanks. And then, Melissa, did you want to contribute, or you can abstain as well?
I would abstain from commenting or abstain from the straw poll.
You don't have to participate in the straw poll if you want, if you don't want, but if you have a thought, it'd be helpful for us all. Although I think we just hit, well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trending in that direction. I would have been on the side to go lower, given that we have multiple people at the top of the step and we don't know if someone is overpaid. We're just continuing that forward for another period without any information. And we're not seeing inflation, and also the Social Security just announced 1.6% for the year. And so we're going higher than that too on a cost of living. So I would have said something lower.
Peter, did you have a thought? Other than stick with it?
No, I'm quite comfortable with the 2%.
Thanks.
And especially in light of the SSA number, which I didn't realize had been announced.
Yeah, I think it just came out this week or last week. I do agree with Peter that if we put something in, we're putting it in. In my experience, anytime you put a placeholder in, revoking it later is almost impossible. So I think whatever we decide, especially without data between now and year end, is the number.
Sarah, did you have any thoughts or want to share your thoughts on the straw and sort of what motion you think would make sense?
Yes, please. Thank you, Gordon. Forgive me if this has been previously addressed. I do hear a lot of 1, 2, and 3% with question marks attached. What I don't know is what dollar amount is that commensurate with, and I guess what the why is the question being raised? Is the percentage out of line and or not commensurate with current market value, and or has it just been tabled for so long that it needs to be voted on, hence our addressing it tonight?
Sarah, so there's a couple things. So there's a email. Did you get I forwarded, or actually I think Bob sent it directly. Did you get Bob's memo?
I believe so. Not attached to yours, correct? Separate document?
No, sorry, that wasn't. So it was something separate that he sent out, and I apologize if you did not receive it. I might not have looked at the all the employees, so I apologize if you didn't get it.
Okay.
Part of what's driving this is that Bob's brought up the general increase. Actually, Bob, do you want to address that and explain the sort of downstream impacts that you've been bringing up?
So
briefly, please.
So quickly, we've been following policies about giving cost increases on top of step increases for the longest time. It's common practice. I question that practice, and because one of the things that I think that practice does or has resulted in is significant growth in the article budget. That needs to be confirmed and verified. So over the past 17 years, our operating budget has gone up 111%, and cost of living 40%. And when you apply it to the numbers in the budget, there's this unexplained $13 million growth in the budget over time from where we started it. And you know, there's all sorts of reasons. They've all been discussed. They all need to be analyzed and confirmed. And if the compounding effect of large salary increases, again, mostly in the schools, drives the costs in our budget, the question I'm raising is, are these increases sustainable over time? And what unforeseen impact might they have? One of the impacts is people are priced out of Dover. So you have long-term residents on fixed income or on Social Security who, you know, really have to sell, and you have this shift to a wealthier town. The other impact is if, as I said, revenue is really a result of increased market value and increased housing stock. In order to mitigate the impact of taxes, then what you have to do is have a pro-growth sort of agenda, and that would go sort of counter to a very, very old cultural preference of people in Dover to have slow or no growth. So that's the conundrum that I was presenting tonight. And so there's a lot written about the cost of living adjustment. And if you look at the private sector, I know Jim doesn't like to do this, but salary increases, so every salary increase, there's a COLA component. It's not separate or added on. And the nominal wage growth is targeted by the Fed at 3.5% to 4%. We greatly exceeded that, despite our best efforts for a number of years. In the school specifically, we've been a little bit more successful and conservative in the town. So my issue tonight is not whether it should be 1, 2, or 3. It's really to get at the policies. Because every time I've been in a conversation about cost increases and COLAs, everybody has said, well, it's only X. This year it's only X. That year it's only X. That's why it's Y for this group. And when I looked at the growth over time, it needs to be confirmed that X, that only X, and that only Y, as if, you're taking that out of somebody's pocket, right? It's not growing, we're not creating this. That adds up to it looks like it adds up to a big number, and it's scary. We should address it. Is that the answer to the question?
Absolutely understood and so crystal clear. And my apologies to everyone else if it was redundant having to hear that again, given that I didn't know the previous answer. Thank you all. And thank you, Bob. You're a gentleman. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Sarah, I would just like to add, I just want to give you a little bit of background on this non-union group in particular that we're voting on this evening.
Thank you, Robin.
So this is a group, it's primarily individuals in the townhouse. It's a non-union organization, and the town has targeted as a policy that they want the median, this group's salary to be at the median of towns that are similar to Dover in size with similar positions. So that's sort of been a target for the town. And as Mary pointed out, the way the salaries are set up is you come in at a certain level, and then based upon the number of years you work, your salary goes up until it's maximized at that particular level, and then you only get a cost of living increase. So what the personnel board has been doing for, I think, almost 20 years now is we were always well below market. So at one point they went out and did a study, and they did some significant increases for individuals in those positions, and then said, we're going to continue with our policy of keeping individuals at the 50th percentile. And every 5 years, we'll go out and have a new wage study and see how we're doing. And so one of the things that the Personnel Board has been doing is we're still trying to get to that 50th percentile. And the way they keep themselves from not falling further behind is to look at cost of living, and sometimes when they have a sense that they're falling behind, they'll make a recommendation of giving these individuals something a little higher than the cost of living. So, but as everybody tonight has pointed out, we are very late doing an update study. So at this point, we're blind as to have we fallen behind more this 50th percent target that we've set for ourselves? Are we above it, or what? And there really aren't any metrics. Like when you negotiate a union contract, you will look at what other union contracts are negotiating for, so you have some data. In our case right now, we have nothing other than we can look at what the average cost of living increases for the unions, because those are also municipal employees, and Rob did the calculation, and I take his word, it's 2.25%. So, you know, tonight, unfortunately, the Personnel Board is trying to do two things at once, and I understand everybody's frustration that it's really hard to do without making sure or understanding where this group is relative to the market.
Thank you for the additional clarification, Robin. I appreciate the specificity of addressing that it's a median that you're trying to achieve. That's very helpful. Many thanks.
If we give differential increases to union as opposed to non-union people, do we run the risk of encouraging a movement towards unionization?
Yes.
So that's something we need to consider as well, because then the decision is taken entirely out of our hands.
Correct.
I think, Andy, I don't think you chimed in yet. I wanted to see if you had some comments.
Thank you, Gordon. Sorry, it took me a second to get off mute there.
No problem.
Yeah, my comments just keep going back to the fact that we don't have data to make an informed decision. And, you know, again, right, it's a small number. No matter what number you pick, it's a small number. But that kind of goes to Bob's point of they're all small numbers and they add up on you. You know, the problem I really have, and it really sticks in my craw, as you can tell, from not having the data this year, is that this is the year that the report was supposed to be updated. We chose not to have the data by not going and doing an update on the report, right? So now we're flying blind and we're forced to make this decision without the data that we thought we were going to have in our hands when we made it. I guess at the end of the day, fine with 2%, but never again am I voting on this without having data that we agreed to have.
Andy, can you give a little background on why that is the case? Like who was responsible and why did we not get it?
Mary, do you want to take that one?
Well, part of the biggest problem is that we were doing a transition. And so our prior town administrator was leaving. We had a temporary person come in while we was doing a search. All very helpful people, but the general feeling was that we should get our new administrator in, and Chris is here, and then we would go out and do the survey. Because to do that without having a town administrator means that you've got data, but that person has been no part of that process. And so there were discussions at the time that we would wait. Now, that means that the data is old, but the other problem is that if we didn't give Chris enough time to be able to drive this, we might not have what we needed, because we really need a town administrator who can speak for us and who can set this up and make sure we get good data, not just data, but good data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then came the pandemic. So.
All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate your patience with this. I think Steve, do you want to make a motion?
We'll make a motion to, is it recommend, I guess, recommend 2%?
A general increase.
Yeah, I don't know what is their official thing I have to say, but yeah, recommend a general salary increase for non-union employees of 2%.
Second.
So we're going to need everyone to, I'm going to do a roll call. Everyone say your name and your vote. I'm sick of forgetting. Rob.
Rob Andrews, aye. Yes.
Peter.
Peter Smith, yes.
Janet.
This started, which means I have to vote on it, and I can't ask a question at this stage.
I believe so. Jim, that's correct. We passed discussion on this, correct? It's great to have Jim here.
I don't, if a town meeting rule you would not be able to, but I suspect, Gordon, that the rules that apply to the Warrant Committee are a little less formal.
Usually, but we're on video, so I want to make sure I'm doing everything perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing fine.
Basically showing off tonight or trying.
Yeah. Bob, Gordon, I think that since it is less formal, it's more important that everybody understand exactly what they're voting on. So I would entertain that question.
Right. So Janet, feel free to ask a question. I'd keep it brief, and I'd ask all parties if they would be so kind to keep it brief, because I know that we're getting pretty late here, and you know, I want to be sensitive to time. We have a couple other minor items to go over after this, so I just want to make sure that we're being respectful. But go ahead, Janet. Thank you.
Is it possible for us to vote, and Robin probably will say this is changing in process, 1.5% for COLA and 1.55% for not having had the updated data for 5 years?
No.
I can explain really quickly if you'd like. One is about the structure of the organization, and one is about a raise. We really are only talking about the raise at this meeting.
We're only talking about the COLA.
COLA.
We're talking about the step increase, which is the sort of other raise, the raise for call it tenure. But we are strictly voting on the COLA. That's it.
Okay. All right. So I go with 2%. Fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Sorry, Cam.
2%.
Could you say your name and
Oh, sorry, Cam Hudson. Yeah, I support the proposal.
Andy.
Andy or City, yay.
Melissa Herman, aye.
Sarah?
Sarah Kadena Kinney, aye.
Gordon Kinder, aye. Did I miss anyone? Because I just really messed up.
I raised it, so I don't think
Melissa. Wait, I said Melissa. I got you, right, Melissa? Okay, good.
Yep.
Gordon Kinder, aye. Did I miss anybody? Just checking, make sure. All right, great. So I think so. That's the Warrant Committee's recommendation. I don't know if Bob, you want to have the Board of Selectmen make your recommendation now, whether you guys need more time.
We just had a discussion tonight. Can we move to vote, Chris?
You can vote tonight. We've also got a placeholder on your agenda for the 8th as well. So it's your call, Bob.
Any preference, Robin or John?
I was on mute, probably the way most people like me to be. I am more than happy to vote at this point if you want.
John?
Can we put Robin back on mute? That'd be... happy to vote.
Okay, so how about a motion to approve a 2% plus the living adjustment for the non-union employees of the town? Chris, is that
Seconded.
correct?
Seconded, John Jeffries.
Okay. All in favor? Robin?
I, Robin Hunter.
John?
Aye, John Jeffries.
I, Bob Springer, vote no. So are we done?
So I think that's it. I think there was one update that I think I alluded to in my opening remarks. And I think Robin was going to give a brief update on a task force that we're putting together to sort of deal with town meeting issues, as well as sort of our general goal to try and sort of bring all the finance groups together. So Robin, come off mute.
So I gotta leave. Can I close the Board of Selectmen meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so can I have a motion to adjourn for the Board of Selectmen?
Motion to adjourn the Board of Selectmen, John Jeffries.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? I, Bob Springer.
Aye, John Jeffries.
I, Robin Hunter.
Okay. Thank you
Enjoy
all.
your dinner, Bob.
Thank you for your thinking and thoughts. Really appreciated being here with all you. It's like a checkerboard, so many people. Thank you. Good night.
That's
Good night.
Aye.
So Robin, I wanted to sort of turn the floor over to you. Give you, let's try to be brief. Again, it's getting pretty late here, and we still have to approve minutes.
Right, I will be really brief. So we're basically going to continue the finance task force meetings, and I think we're just going to make sure that there's a lot more transparency and communication between the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee as we move forward. One of the things I really appreciate the feedback that you gave us on our on the presentation that we made about the reserve strategy, and I'm actually going to reach out to Bob and Peter to specifically get comments that they had on the presentation, and then send it back out to everybody to look at. I thought the comments were really good, and it made me look at the presentation in a different light. The other thing is, as we think about the reserves, as we think about the budget process for this year, we also need to think about town meeting and how to prepare for town meeting. So we had a preliminary meeting, Gordon, Jim Rapetti, and myself, to brainstorm last night, and we talked about preparing for the best case scenario as well as the worst case scenario, and to begin to prepare for that right away so that we're not put in a position where we're reacting when we actually know whether or not we can hold town meeting in May. So again, I just think it's open door communication, being transparent, making sure we all have the same information. And it took me 2 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is there any other business or liaison updates that anyone wants to bring before the committee?
Just very briefly, the superintendent of streets and fire chief Craig Hughes is going to be retiring in November because of health issues.
That's unfortunate. I did get that news a while back, and I shot him an email to thank him for all he did for this. So disappointed to hear that. He was incredible at preserving value in town assets. I think we still have a truck from 1978 in use, and we've asked him, and do you need to replace it? He says, no, still works. I've always been fond of him for that reason. He made our job easy. Anything else? Anyone else? Rob, anything in school? Anything? Sorry.
Yeah, it's nothing pressing, so we can do it the next time. Yeah.
Fantastic. At this point, I'd like to, has everyone reviewed the minutes that Peter circulated? Or does anyone need a minute to look at the minutes before we vote on minutes? All right, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as circulated by Peter for the, Peter, do you have the date?
September 2 is the first one.
September 2 and September 2 and September 16th, 2020.
Second. Andy.
Oh, yeah, Gordon Kinder makes motion. Sorry, Andy said he seconds. So we'll proceed to the roll call.
You do them both at the same time? To save having to do 2 roll calls?
No, it's a single roll call for both minutes. The motion is to approve both minutes. Oh, sorry. John, did you have something? Am I doing that incorrectly?
No.
Okay. So, Rob. Oh, sorry. Gordon Kinder, approve. Rob.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Janet.
Aye.
Cam.
Muted.
Cam, did you?
I got there. Aye.
Andy, did I already call you? No, Andy.
No, Andy. Aye.
Janet. Oh, sorry, I already called Janet. Melissa.
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
All right. I don't think there's any other business. Being no other business, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you guys. Thanks.
Vote with our feet.
I appreciate it. It's been a long one, and good work. I know this is sort of a challenging thing for us all to be. Sorry, I'm looking around the screen. It's all we're dealing with, and I really appreciate you guys bearing with us, and look forward to the next meeting. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.